"Excuse me, sir. We need you to move now." The flight attendant's voice sliced through the stillness of the cabin like ice. Someone turned their head. A few people paused mid-scroll or slipped off one side of their headphones. In seat 14C, an elderly man with silver hair looked up. There was no anger in his eyes, just a deep crease near the corner of his eye as if he had seen this moment coming. He just didn't expect it to come right before the aircraft door closed. Walter Grady, 79 years old, a former U.S. Marine. He was sitting exactly where he'd paid nearly $60 extra to reserve 3 months ago. Seat 14C, aisle, extra legroom row was only self-approved luxury. His left knee hadn't been entirely his since 1970. It belonged more to the jungles of Khe Sanh, a souvenir from a war few wanted to remember. The flight attendant Kayla, maybe early 30s, crisp uniform, polished smile, but her voice was sharp as an ice pick. "There's a mom with 3 kids that need to sit together. Your row is the only open block. Please relocate to 33B. Walter furrowed his brow. "I'm sorry, but I reserved this seat for medical reasons." "Yes, I understand," Kayla smiled mechanically. "But if you don't move, we can't close the aircraft door." And the words were light as feathers, but they dropped into the cabin like a stone. Silence. And Walter felt it, the eyes, sharp and pricking like needles at the back of his neck. No one asked why. They just saw what they wanted to see. An old man being selfish, refusing to give up his seat for a mother with 3 kids. No one remembered that to even step onto this plane, he endured 2 months of physical therapy. That every morning required anti-inflammatory pills. That he scraped savings from his military pension just to afford this very seat. Not for comfort, but to survive a 5-hour flight without losing circulation in his leg. Walter took a deep breath. Then he stood, slowly, unsteadily, and quietly pulled his worn canvas bag from under the seat, the one with the faded USMC emblem, blurred by time. He walked down the aisle, slightly bowing his head whenever someone didn't bother to move their legs. The young girl in the middle seat looked at him like he just ruined her family vacation. The young man raised an eyebrow, as if to say, "Typical old conservative." No one smiled. No one offered help. No one asked his name. And then he reached seat 33B. Middle seat, near the lavatory. Next to the engine. No room to stretch. No decent light. On one side, a college kid engrossed in an action movie with a pair of Chunky Beats headphones. On the other, an office worker typing like he was fighting for his life against a deadline. No one shifted to help him sit. No one said a word. No one remembered that this man once held a rifle issued by their own government to defend the very freedom they now enjoyed. Walter closed his eyes. His knee throbbed. But that wasn't the worst of it. What stung the most was the feeling of being invisible. Right there in the most cramped space in the world, he wasn't seen at all. Walter Grady sat motionless in seat 33B. His hand gently clutched the knee that throbbed beneath worn khaki fabric. No one asked if he was okay. Not a single word of thanks. To the rest of the cabin, he was nothing more than a problem that had been handled. But someone had seen everything. Emily didn't see him as a bothersome old man. She was a senior advisor on the airline's corporate board and someone with a quiet habit of observing. She had noticed the way flight attendant Kayla twisted her words behind a rehearsed, synthetic smile. She had clearly seen how the surrounding passengers rushed to judge without bothering to ask why. Emily looked toward Walter. He was trying not to wince as his leg cramped into the tight seat. His frayed travel bag rested on his lap, and his sinewy arms were drawn in tight, as if he wished he could disappear. Emily closed her laptop and reached for her phone. Not to record a video, not to post a trending complaint, just to send a short 20-word message to Chloe, her close friend in the airline's customer experience division. Passenger Walter Grady, seat 14, C, veteran with knee injury, forced to move. Unacceptable. Please, escalate. She hit send, then said nothing more. A few minutes passed. The plane's door still hadn't closed. The pre-flight announcements played on in the background, but something in Emily's chest wouldn't settle. It wasn't about the seating. It wasn't about the departure time. It was something simpler. Silence, sometimes, is complicity. She wasn't someone who typically intervened. But this time, she knew indifference would leave scars deeper than the one on that old man's knee. Emily adjusted her blazer and took a deep breath. She didn't know if that message would change anything. But some moments in life, silence just isn't enough. And she had chosen to speak. In her own way, in the cockpit of Flight 728 bound for Baltimore, Captain Rick Donovan was reviewing the final pre-flight checklist with his first officer. A former Air Force pilot, 22 years of service, 11,500 flight hours, Rick wasn't the kind of man easily swayed. Machines were machines, orders were orders. But today, something different appeared on the tablet screen before him. Flagged, veteran Walter Grady, seat 14C, 33B, under pressure, medical concern, internal report initiated. Sender, Emily Monroe, Diamond Elite Board Advisor. Rick squinted. That name, it rang a bell. Walter Grady. It took only 3 seconds. Rick unbuckled his harness, set down the tablet, and spoke slowly. Hold the taxi. The first officer looked up. Captain? Tell ground to hold. I'll be back in 3. As the cockpit door clicked open, a different kind of air swept through the cabin. It didn't make a sound, but everyone felt it. Bodies leaned ever so slightly toward the aisle, almost by instinct. Rick Donovan uniform crisp, 4 gold stripes on his sleeve, expression calm like a still morning lake walked slowly down the aisle. Not a word, not a wasted movement, just his eyes, scanning the cabin, as if seeking someone specific. And then, he stopped at row 33. Walter looked up. The tall frame of the pilot cast a long shadow across the aisle, blocking the overhead light. He recognized the polished black shoes, the silver glint of pilot wings, and then the vaguely familiar face. 2 old soldiers, locked eyesmen, who had once worn uniforms, once stood in places where the only sound was heavy breathing through smoke and blood. Rick didn't speak right away. He raised his hand. Straight, formal, unshaken. A military salute in the dead silence of the cabin. Staff Sergeant Walter Grady, Rick said, enunciating every word. On behalf of this airline, and as someone who has also served, I offer you my deepest apology. Walter blinked. All other sounds disappeared. Just the pounding of heart sand, the stunned hush of the entire cabin. You will not spend another hour of this flight in pain. I'd like to invite you to seat 1A first class right now. Rick turned toward the middle rows, locking eyes with the frozen flight attendant in the distance. Miss Kayla Bennett, please escort Mr. Grady to 1A now. Kayla hesitated. Captain, first class is... Rick raised his hand to cut her off. If seat 1A is occupied, ask for a volunteer. If no one volunteers, he'll sit in my co-pilot seat, and if necessary, his eyes swept the cabin. He can have my seat. The cabin fell silent once more. But this time, it wasn't the silence of judgment. It was the silence of respect. Walter froze. His eyes were full of disbelief. He had never once been offered a seat in his life. Rick gently placed a hand on his elbow, steadying him, helping him rise. As Walter stepped out of seat 33B, no one avoided him like before. The young man with the headphones quickly stood up, mumbling, "Sir, I'm sorry." The office worker lowered his head, avoiding Walter's gaze. No one said much, but everyone felt something inside them shift. Walter walked slowly behind the flight attendant. Every step was tense. But this time, he didn't walk alone. He had an escort. He had a silent cabin watching him. And he had his dignity back. Kayla, her face pale, led Walter down the main aisle. Those who had once turned their faces away now looked down, avoiding eye contact. A few even rose to their feet, nodding slightly, hands over their hearts, a silent salute, yet deeply meaningful. Rick Donovan walked behind them, quiet as a ceremonial guard. When they reached the front row, Kayla stopped. Seat 1A first row, by the window, was occupied. A middle-aged man in a white polo shirt was scrolling through his phone, not looking up. Kayla leaned slightly and said, "Excuse me, sir, we need this seat for a special passenger, at the captain's request." The man looked up, his confused expression slowly turned solemn as he saw Walter in the faded USMC emblem on his bag. No arguments. No hesitation. He simply nodded, then stood. "Sir," he said softly, "it's an honor to give up this seat for you." Walter paused. He wasn't used to kindness, and especially not to being called an honor since the day he was discharged. Rick gently placed a hand on his back, as if to say, "You deserve this." Kayla stepped aside. She said nothing, tablet still clutched in her hands like a useless shield. Walter slowly eased into seat 1A. The seat was wide, soft, with room to stretch his legs, but what he felt wasn't comfort. It was restoration. It was the feeling of no longer being seen as a burden. Another flight attendant came by with a light blanket and a fresh bottle of water. Walter nodded in thanks, a quiet, ingrained habit from his military days. He didn't say a word. He just sat still, hands resting on his lap, chest rising and falling gently with each breath. And then, a voice came from row 3. "Staff Sergeant Grady?" Walter turned his head. A man in his early 30s, shaved head, wearing a hoodie and jeans, was standing in the aisle. His eyes trembled. "I'm Reeves, Corporal Jason Reeves, Afghanistan, Camp Leatherneck, 2006. The air seemed to freeze. Walter blinked, and then his expression shifted from confusion to recognition. That man, he was the young soldier Walter had pulled from a burning Humvee nearly 20 years ago. "You saved my life," Jason said, his voice breaking. "I never got the chance to thank you until today." Jason bowed his head deeply, then returned to his seat. Tears streamed quietly down his cheeks. No one clapped. No one smiled. There was only silence. A silence filled with respect that slowly rippled down each row. And in that moment, inside a sealed cabin mid-flight, Walter Grady was no longer invisible. He was seen. He was remembered. And he was honored not for who he used to be, but because he had never stopped being someone worthy of honor. The cabin hadn't yet shifted into flight mode. Everyone seemed suspended in a strange kind of air, not because the plane was delayed, but because something inside their hearts had just awakened. Captain Rick Donovan returned to the cockpit. He stood silently for a moment in front of the control panel, one hand resting on the comm switch. Then he flipped on the mic, steadied his voice, and began to speak. Not to the crew, but to everyone on board Flight 728. "Ladies and gentlemen, before we depart, there's something I need to say." The cabin fell still. Headphones came off. Phones were lowered. Coffee cups paused in midair. Today, a mistake was made. A man who served this country, who carries both visible and invisible scars from that service, was asked to give up his seat. Not because of a booking error, not because of a lack of space, but because a policy prioritized convenience over honor. He paused. His breathing echoed softly through the cabin speakers. No one moved. "Let me be perfectly clear. This plane will not take off while injustice quietly sits in seat 33B. That sentence, it struck like lightning through the fog of apathy. Some passengers lowered their heads. A few wiped tears from their eyes. Not because they had done wrong, but because they had stayed silent when wrong was unfolding before them. "That man," Rick continued, "is Staff Sergeant Walter Grady, a decorated Marine, a man who once pulled his brothers from a burning vehicle while wounded himself. He didn't ask for recognition. He simply asked to keep the seat he booked so his leg wouldn't seize in pain." Then Rick's voice softened but didn't falter. "We failed him. But here's the thing. In the United States Marine Corps, we don't leave our own behind. Not in combat, and not at 30,000 feet in the air." A soft sniffle broke the silence from the rear of the cabin. A woman placed her hand gently over her husband's quote. A child stopped, fidgeting, eyes fixed on the front row, where an old man sat quietly, still and alone. "So if this flight runs 10 minutes late today," Rick concluded, "I'll take every second of that delay with pride." He turned off the mic. 1 second passed. Then 2. Then, a light round of applause began from the center rows. It spread like ripples. No one was asked to stand, but they stood one by one. They didn't clap for a speech. They clapped because a truth had been spoken. At just the right time. In Satinois, Walter Grady didn't rise. He just sat there, hands resting on his lap, head slightly bowed. As sunlight filtered gently through the window beside him, the plane landed at 12:07 p.m. beneath the crystal-clear skies of Baltimore. The wheels touched down softly, letting out a low, warm rumble, like a whisper. "You've arrived, and this time you are no longer invisible." Endo. Walter Grady remained seated in 1A, seat belt still fastened, hands resting gently on his knees. No rush to stand, no urge to push his way out the door. For the first time in years, he felt no need to hurry, because he had been seen, and seen the right way. As he stepped off the plane, the flight crew lined both sides of the jet bridge. No scripted lines, no hollow "thank you for flying with us," just quiet nods. Eyes that met his not with pity, but with silent acknowledgement. We know we were wrong, and thank you for enduring. At baggage claim, she stood waiting. Crisp white uniform, hair neatly pinned, eyes as bright as the summer sun. His granddaughter cadet, Jenna Grady, the first in the family to follow in his footsteps. Fresh graduate of the United States Naval Academy. In her hands, a slightly crooked, handwritten sign. Welcome, Grandpa Walt. And when she spotted him limping slightly through the crowd, her face lit up. She dropped the sign and ran toward him like a 6-year-old girl. Grandpa? He didn't stop her. No hesitantug. No reserved smile. He opened his arms and received her embrace like waves crashing into a shore that had long been hardened by time. Your knee, she pulled back worried. Walter gave a rare smile that reached all the way to his eyes. I've had worse. They sat side by side in the baggage area, not saying too much. Jenna talked about tactics class, marksmanship training, and her commissioning ceremony. Walter just listened, occasionally nodding his eyes, never leaving her face. They said you got bumped to first class? Jenna tilted her head. And the pilot made some kind of announcement about you? Walter only shook his head, voice gravelly but calm. I had a bad seat, but someone stood up. She didn't fully understand. Not yet. But that evening, when she watched the now viral video, a pilot addressing the cabin to publicly apologize to a veteran, she cried. She hugged him again tighter this time, as if trying to hold on to him, to protect him from all the forgetting that had ever happened. And for the first time in many years, Walter Grady did not bow his head at words of thanks. He received them, like a man who had finally been given back his name, and more importantly, had finally been seen. 2 days after the flight, on a gently sunny Wednesday morning in Rockville, Maryland, Walter Grady left his neighborhood post office as usual, newspaper in hand, coffee in a paper cup, and his aching knee still hissing with every slow step. He wasn't expecting anything but bills or supermarket flyers. But that day, there was a thick envelope, stamped in red. Trans-American Airlines, Office of Executive Affairs. He sat down on the wooden bench on his front porch, opening the envelope with the same old utility blade he once carried in the service. Inside was a formal letter, printed on silver embossed stationery. Dear Mr. Grady, we offer our deepest apologies for the events aboard Flight 728. What occurred was not only unacceptable, it was dishonorable. Effective immediately, you are hereby designated a lifetime guest of honor with Trans-American Airlines. No more booking codes, no fees, no seat restrictions. Just tell us where you need to go. We'll get you there with the respect you've always deserved. Veterans Affairs Council, TAA. Along with it was a lifetime flight voucher and a handwritten card from a customer service representative. My father was a Marine too. Thank you for reminding all of us what honor looks like. Walter said nothing. He just sat there, breeze lifting the edges of his white hair, fingers gently gripping the letter. Not because of the free flights, but because someone had finally named out loud what he once gave everything for: honor. A week later, another envelope arrived. No corporate logo. No typed label, just blue ink and a faded round seal. Department of the Army, Military Records Division. Walter opened it slowly. Inside was a faded, thick paper documenting old-style military file, with a small handwritten note pinned to the top. Mr. Grady, during a recent public inquiry, your service file was reopened. A missing citation from 1970 has been found and restored. You were never forgotten, just buried under dust. Respectfully, Lieutenant General Benjamin Crosswell, Archive Command. Walter read each word carefully. The report recounted the events on Charlie Hill, Quezon, the 12th of March, 1970. A midnight ambush. A Humvee struck by an RPG. Walter then, a Marine Staff Sergeant, dragged 6 fellow soldiers from the burning vehicle, his knee shredded by shrapnel. That report had been marked incomplete due to wartime chaos, and was never entered into his official record. But now, it had returned. Tucked beneath it was a handwritten letter. The script was unsteady, but resolute. Dear Sergeant Grady, you don't know me, but I've known you every single day since 1970. I was Corporal Alan Mercerth, last one you pulled from that vehicle. I went home. I got married. I had 3 kids. I lived because you refused to leave me behind. You weren't invisible, not to us. General A. Mercer, USMC, retired. Walter set the letter down on the table, leaned back in his chair, and looked out toward the row of autumn trees just beginning to shed their leaves. He didn't speak. He didn't cry. He simply let the silence wrap around him. A silence no longer heavy with forgetting, but full of recognition. The story of the old man in seat 33B traveled faster than any plane. It appeared in local newspapers, then on national broadcasts as a quiet symbol of justice rediscovered. Social media lit up with the hashtag number, #salute@33ba digital tribute to remembrance. The photo of Walter Grady sitting in seat 1A, head bowed slightly, sunlight cutting through the window onto his weathered hands, became an icon, not of fame, but of the return of respect. In the weeks that followed, Walter didn't appear on camera. He didn't go on talk shows. He didn't grant interviews. He continued living in his pale gray, one-story home in suburban Rockville. Still walked to the local grocer each morning, canvas bag in hand, left foot dragging slightly behind the right. Only one thing had changed. Walter walked a little straighter. He no longer lowered his head when strangers said hello. He no longer brushed off "thank you for your service" as if it were mere politeness. Because now, he knew they meant it. One day, while waiting in line for coffee, a young man behind him gently tapped his shoulder and said, "Sir, I read about you. Thank you for reminding us how to act like men." Walter simply nodded. No words were needed. On a late autumn afternoon, he sat on his front porch, watching the sun dip behind the line of oak trees. The old wooden chair still creaked with every shift of his weight. The wind carried the scent of fallen leaves and freshly cut grass. Jennahy's granddaughter had just sent a postcard from her new base. On it, in her neat handwriting, were the words, "You gave me the most important thing, the courage to stand when no one else would speak." Walter smiled softly, not out of pride, but because for the first time in so many years, he felt truly seen. Honor doesn't always appear on the front page. It doesn't always come with brass bands or medals. Sometimes it arrives late, very late, but when it arrives at the right moment, it heals what silence has quietly bruised for a lifetime. Because not every sacrifice is pinned with a ribbon. Not every battle ends in victory. But sometimes, all it takes is one person to stand up and say, "I see you." And that is enough to reclaim an entire life lost to forgetting. Walter Grady no longer sits in seat 33B. He's returned to where he's always belonged. A soldier, a grandfather, a man who is honored,